Chapter 1. The Edge of Hope. The apartment was quiet in the way only places that have witnessed too much can be quiet. Not peaceful, not calm, held breath. Rain stitched silver lines down the window, blurring the streetlights beyond the blinds. The world outside moved on. Cars passing, tires hissing against wet pavement. But inside, time sat heavy and unmoving. She sat at the kitchen table in the thin blue glow of evening, cardigan slipping from one shoulder, fingers curled around a small bronze coin as though it might dissolve if she loosened her grip. 30 days. The letters pressed into her skin, the ridges familiar now. She traced them again and again like a prayer she didn't fully believe in yet. Her hands trembled. Not as violently as they used to, not the bone-rattling shakes of detox, but enough. Enough to remind her that her body still remembered the language of poison. On the counter behind her, the space where bottles once stood felt louder than their presence ever had. She could see them anyway, lined up like soldiers, clear in brown glass catching the light, waiting. The cabinet still smelled faintly of stale whiskey no matter how many times she scrubbed it. Ghosts were stubborn tenants. She stared at her reflection in the darkened window. The glass turned her into a stranger. Hollowed cheeks, eyes rimmed red from nights that refused to end. A tear slipped free before she felt it coming, carving a clean path down skin that had grown too used to salt. "You did this," the darkness whispered. It did not shout. It didn't need to. She remembered gallery openings, white walls and murmurs of admiration, the hum of recognition when her name was spoken with respect. She remembered the weight of her camera in her hands, the thrill of catching light just before it fled. She had been precise once, intentional, a hunter of moments. Then the after-parties had become the main event. Just one drink to steady the nerves. Just one to celebrate. Just one to soften the sharp edges of expectation. Alcohol had been generous at first. It gave her warmth, confidence, sleep. Then it began to take. The assignments slowed, deadlines slipped, calls went unanswered. She missed her sister's wedding because she'd woken up on the bathroom floor, cheek pressed to tile, unsure how many hours, or days, had passed. The memory rose like bile. Her fingers tightened around the sobriety chip until her knuckles blanched. 30 days. 30 nights of wrestling with the ache in her bones. 30 mornings of waking up raw and exposed without the buffer of a hangover to numb the shame. The hardest part wasn't the cravings. It was the silence. In sobriety, everything spoke. The refrigerator's low hum, the ticking clock, her own thoughts, unmuted and merciless. She pushed back from the table abruptly, chair legs scraping against the floor. The sound cracked through the room like accusation. Her breath came quick and shallow as she crossed to the bathroom. She didn't turn on the light. She didn't need to. The mirror was there, looming. Even in near darkness, she could see its fractured corner. The crack from the night she'd hurled a bottle at her own reflection after a client had fired her over the phone. The glass had split, but not shattered. Like her. She stepped closer. The woman staring back looked brittle, but alive. "I'm still here," she whispered, testing the words. The darkness shifted tactics. One drink would quiet this. One drink would let you sleep. No one would know. Her pulse thudded in her ears. Her mouth went dry with remembered burn. She could almost taste it, amber and fire, sliding down her throat, spreading false comfort through her veins. Her gaze dropped to the sink. For a terrible moment, she imagined reaching beneath it, finding a hidden bottle she'd forgotten. Relief flickered across her mind like lightning. But there was nothing there. She had thrown them all away. She had meant it. Her hands began to shake harder now. The craving was a living thing, clawing up her spine, whispering that surrender would be softer than this endless fight. Recovery isn't a destination. It's a war fought in inches. She stumbled back into the bedroom, breath ragged, vision blurring. The apartment felt smaller, walls inching closer. Her heart pounded, as if trying to escape her chest. "I can't do this," she said aloud. The words hung heavy. Her gaze snagged on a box shoved beneath the bed. one she hadn't opened since she'd come back from treatment. She dropped to her knees, pulling it free with unsteady hands. Photographs spilled across the floor. Landscapes. Portraits. Moments frozen mid-laughter. And then, her. Not the hollowed version. Not the woman in the mirror. This one stood barefoot on a beach at sunset, camera hanging from her neck, hair wind-tangled, head thrown back in unguarded joy. The sky behind her burned orange and gold. Her eyes were bright, certain, whole. The memory hit like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. That woman had existed. She hadn't been a lie. A sob tore through her chest, but this one was different. Not sharp with self-hatred, not jagged with regret. Grief, yes, but also something fragile. She pressed the photograph to her chest and let herself feel it. The loss, the longing, the faintest thread of possibility. The darkness still whispered, but it no longer filled the room. It hovered at the edges instead. 30 days. She looked down at the chip still clutched in her hand and placed it gently on top of the photograph. Not tonight, she said. It wasn't a promise for forever. It wasn't a vow for tomorrow. Just this moment. Outside, the rain began to ease. The streetlight beyond the blinds burned steady and gold. The apartment was still suffocating, still thick with memory, but it was also quiet in a different way now. Waiting. She didn't know how many more nights would feel like this. Didn't know how many times she would have to stand at the edge of surrender and choose differently. But for now, she was breathing. For now, she was still here. And for this moment, at least, she chose hope. Chapter 2. The morning after the war. Morning did not arrive gently. It slipped in pale and uncertain, filtering through the blinds in thin gray lines that striped the bedroom wall. She woke on the floor, still half curled around the photograph, her cheeks stiff from dried tears. For a moment she didn't remember why she was there. Then the weight in her chest returned. Not crushing, not catastrophic, present. She rolled onto her back and stared at the ceiling. The craving from the night before had retreated, but it had not disappeared. It lingered like smoke after a fire, faint, acrid, waiting for a spark. 31 days. The thought felt fragile. She pushed herself upright slowly. Her body ached from sleeping on hardwood, but the ache was honest. It belonged to her. No chemical fog blurred its edges. In the kitchen, the silence felt different than it had the night before. Less predatory, more observant. She filled the kettle and set it on the stove. The click of the burner, the rush of flame, the ordinary mechanics of making tea. These small rituals steadied her. In early recovery, her counselor had called them anchors. Structure builds safety, he'd said. At the time, she had hated that sentence. It sounded too simple for a life that had imploded so spectacularly. Now, standing barefoot on cold tile, she understood. She wrapped both hands around the mug once it was filled, letting the heat seep into her trembling fingers. The tremor was lighter today. Manageable. On the table lay the photograph and the bronze chip, side by side like unlikely companions. She sat down across from them. The woman in the picture still looked impossibly alive. Sunlit, fearless, certain of her own talent. It hurt to look at her, but it also hurt to look away. "You're not gone," she murmured. The thought scared her. Because if that version of her still existed somewhere beneath the wreckage, then rebuilding was possible. And rebuilding meant work. Her phone buzzed suddenly, slicing through the quiet. She flinched. Unknown number. Her pulse ticked upward. For a split second, a wild thought flashed. Maybe it was a client. Maybe someone had seen her old portfolio. Maybe... She caught herself. Hope, she was learning, had to be handled carefully. It could lift you. It could also gut you. The buzzing stopped. A voicemail notification blinked in its place. She stared at it for a long moment before pressing play. "Hey," a familiar voice said, tentative. It's me. I heard you're back in town. I wanted to check in. No pressure. Call me if you want. Her sister. The air left her lungs in a shaky exhale. They hadn't spoken in nearly a year. Not since the wedding she'd missed. Not since the excuses had worn thin, and the apologies had started sounding rehearsed. Shame crept up her spine, slow and practiced. You don't deserve that call. You'll disappoint her again. She pressed the phone to her forehead, eyes closing. The darkness was subtle this morning, strategic. It no longer screamed for alcohol. It whispered about worthlessness instead. Different weapon. Same enemy. Her gaze drifted back to the sobriety chip. 31 days wasn't impressive to most people. In the outside world, it was just a month on a calendar. But she knew what those days contained. Nights clawing at her own skin. Mornings of nausea and memory. Meetings where she'd forced herself to say, "I'm an alcoholic," out loud. Again and again, until the word lost some of its power. 31 days was a battlefield survived. Her thumb hovered over her sister's number. What if she didn't answer? What if she did? Recovery wasn't just about not drinking. That was the brutal beginning, the visible part. The harder part was stepping back into a world you had burned bridges in. She stood abruptly, the restless energy building again, and moved toward the living room. Her camera bag sat in the corner, untouched since she'd returned from treatment. Dust clung to it. She hesitated before kneeling beside it, unzipping it slowly, as if it might accuse her. The camera lay inside, heavy and familiar. For months, she hadn't trusted herself with it. Drinking had made her sloppy, careless. She had once shot an entire event out of focus. Another time she'd forgotten to charge her batteries. The humiliation had been swift and public. She lifted the camera now, hands steadying instinctively around its shape. Muscle memory flickered awake. She turned it on. The small mechanical whir felt like a heartbeat. She didn't plan anything elaborate. No grand artistic resurrection. She simply raised it toward the window. Morning light filtered through the blinds, striping the wall in pale gold. The empty bottle-shaped shadows were gone from the counter. In their place, a mug of tea, a bronze chip, a photograph of a woman laughing into the wind. She adjusted the aperture without thinking. Focused, breathed. Click. The sound startled her, not because it was loud, because it was hers. She lowered the camera slowly and checked the screen. The image was simple, quiet, unremarkable to anyone else. But it was clear, sharp, alive. Something shifted inside her. Not fireworks, not triumph. Just a subtle recalibration. A reminder that the part of her that saw beauty, that chased light, had not been entirely drowned. Her phone still lay on the table. She walked back to it, camera still hanging from her neck, and pressed call before she could talk herself out of it. It rang twice. "Hello?" Her sister's voice was cautious. Her throat tightened. "Hey," she said softly. "It's me." A pause. Then, "Hi." So much history in one syllable. She gripped the edge of the table, grounding herself. "I got your message. I'm trying. I'm 31 days sober." Silence again, but not the suffocating kind. This one felt full. "I'm glad you called," her sister said finally, voice thick. "I didn't know if you would." "Neither did I," she admitted. They didn't solve anything in that first conversation. There were no sweeping reconciliations, no immediate forgiveness. Just small exchanges, careful steps. But when she hung up, her hands were no longer shaking. The darkness lingered at the edges of the room, watching. It would be back tonight. It always came back. Recovery wasn't linear. It wasn't cinematic. It was mundane and relentless, and built from decisions that looked insignificant from the outside. Don't drink. Answer the phone. Take the picture. Stay. She picked up the photograph of her former self again and studied it. The woman on the beach had no idea what storms were coming. No idea how close she would one day stand to the edge. But maybe that wasn't the point. Maybe hope wasn't about returning to who she had been. Maybe it was about becoming someone new. Someone who had stood in the dark and chosen light anyway. She set the old photograph beside the new one she had just taken. Past and present, not enemies, evidence, 31 days. She inhaled slowly, deeply, and let it out without trembling. Not today, she whispered, and the war, for now, quieted. Chapter 3. Triggers. Day 32 arrived with teeth. It wasn't dramatic. There were no nightmares, no shaking so violent she couldn't hold a cup. It was worse than that. Ordinary. Clear. Functional. She showered. Dressed. Even applied a thin line of mascara she found buried in a drawer. The woman in the mirror still looked tired, but less haunted. The crack in the glass caught the light like a scar that had stopped bleeding. She picked up her camera before she could second-guess herself. The air outside her apartment felt unfamiliar against her skin, cool and damp from last night's rain. She hadn't walked this block sober in years. The world seemed louder now. Car doors slamming, distant sirens, wind pushing litter along the curb. Every sensation came through unfiltered. She moved slowly, unsure where she was going, only that she couldn't sit inside another day with the walls pressing in. The city had once been her playground. She used to chase light between buildings, wait for the precise second a stranger stepped into a perfect frame. Now it felt like a test. She passed the cafe she used to meet clients in. The owner had once hung her photographs along the brick wall near the register. They'd been taken down quietly after she'd missed one too many appointments. She kept walking. A block later, she froze. The bar stood on the corner, all polished wood and warm amber windows. Even in daylight, it glowed. She knew the smell inside. Citrus peel, spilled beer, perfume layered over old wood. She knew the bartender's laugh, knew which stool had become hers. Her pulse kicked hard. It wasn't the idea of getting drunk that hit her first. It was the memory of belonging. Inside those walls, no one expected her to be brilliant, or disciplined, or reliable. They expected her to drink, to laugh too loud, to stay until closing. There was comfort in predictability. Her mouth went dry. Just walk in. You don't have to drink. You could just sit. Her body leaned forward before her mind caught up. 32 days. Her hand drifted toward her pocket, searching for the chip. It wasn't there. She'd left it on the kitchen table. Panic flared. Irrational, but sharp. The bar door opened, and someone stepped out, laughing, sunlight flashing against a glass in their hand. The smell of alcohol drifted faintly on the air. Her chest tightened. Heat rushed through her veins, quick and electric. This is the moment, she realized. Not the bathroom floor. Not the crying at night. This. Standing 10 feet from the door. Her fingers tightened around her camera strap instead. If you go in, she told herself, you know how this ends. Not with one drink. Never with one. She had tried moderation more times than she could count. Bargained with herself. Promised to stop after 2. Promised to only drink on weekends. Promised to never drink alone again. Every promise had ended the same way. Empty bottles and blank spaces where memory should have been. Her breath came shallow. You don't have to decide about forever. Just decide about right now. She stepped back. One step, then another. The bar's golden glow seemed to dim as distance grew between them. The craving screamed for a moment. Loud, furious, insulted. Then, slowly, it lowered to a growl. She didn't run. She forced herself to walk at a steady pace until the corner disappeared behind her. Her hands were shaking again. She ducked into a small park 2 streets over and collapsed onto a bench, lungs burning as though she'd sprinted miles. Her heart pounded against her ribs like it wanted out. Tears blurred her vision. I almost did, she whispered. The admission scared her. Recovery had felt steady yesterday, manageable. She had taken a photograph, called her sister, drunk tea like a person rebuilding a life. And yet, 10 feet from a door, she had nearly thrown it all away. The darkness didn't always look like despair. Sometimes it looked like nostalgia. She wiped at her face and forced herself to look up. The park was quiet. A mother pushed a stroller along the path. A man jogged past with headphones in. Leaves clung wetly to the grass, sunlight catching on their edges. Ordinary life. She lifted her camera with trembling hands. Through the lens, the world narrowed. Focus sharpened. The mother paused to adjust a blanket. The jogger slowed to tie his shoe. A breeze lifted a strand of hair from the woman's face. Click. The sound steadied her breathing. She adjusted again, catching the way sunlight filtered through thinning clouds. Click. Each photograph felt like reclaiming territory, not the grand sweeping kind she used to chase. No elaborate compositions or dramatic contrasts. Just presence. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. This time, she didn't flinch. A text. From a number saved simply as Maya. Sponsor. How's today? She stared at the message, throat tightening. Honesty had become a discipline in recovery. Not comfortable, not natural, but necessary. Her thumbs hovered over the screen. Hard. Walked past the bar. Almost went in. 3 dots appeared almost instantly. But you didn't. She swallowed. No. A pause. That's the work. Call me if you need to. Proud of you. Proud of you. The words felt foreign. Heavy. She wasn't sure she deserved them, but she let them sit there anyway. She leaned back against the bench and closed her eyes, letting the sun warm her face. The craving still lingered, duller now, but not gone. It might surge again tonight, or tomorrow, or next week when something breaks her open unexpectedly. Recovery wasn't a straight line upward. It was a series of intersections, door or sidewalk, bottle or breath, isolation or call. She opened her eyes and studied the images she'd taken. They weren't groundbreaking. They wouldn't hang in galleries. But they were clear. She was clear. 32 days. She stood slowly, legs steadier now, and slung the camera over her shoulder. The bar was still on that corner. It would be there tomorrow, and the next day. So would the choice. As she walked home, the city didn't feel like a test anymore. It felt like terrain. And today, at least, she had crossed it without surrender.